All right. Welcome to Digital Learning Day. A lot of you have already been here, and maybe you've seen me say this a few times. So just ignore me for a second if you have. We're going to get started with our next presentation, Movers and Shakers with Gary Greenberg, the Director of Educational Technology at CET. My name is Dusty Miller. I'm from WGTE Public Media in Toledo. And we also have with us Amy Palermo. She's the executive director of ITSCO, and she's going to be monitoring our tech today while I moderate the document that is associated with our digital learning day today. If you don't have it open, definitely open it so that you can participate and actively ask questions and troubleshoot with the rest of us as Gary goes about his speech and tells us a little bit more about what he's going to talk about. Some things to know before we get started, before I throw it to Gary. We are on a slight delay. I'm going to try, and if you have a question, fit it in somewhere that's convenient for Gary. But because of the delay, it might not happen at the right time. So I might save your best questions for the end, just so they get answered properly and we're not backtracking too much. The other thing is, if you are having trouble seeing the broadcast at any point, if it freezes or the audio is a little funny, go ahead and refresh your screen. And you might also want to close a lot of those extra tabs or browsing windows that you have open, because the live stream tends to be a little more taxing than watching a normal video on YouTube. So let us know what's happening, take part in the conversation, ask questions, and have fun for this, what I think has been a really successful digital learning day so far. All right, Gary, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, it's all you.
Thank you, Dusty. And thank you, Amy, for doing tech support. Welcome, everybody. Happy Digital Learning Day. Feliz Digital Learning Day. Welcome to the Makers and Shakers, Making Things for Deeper Learning presentation. As Dusty said, I'm Gary Greenberg. I'm the Director of Educational Technology at CET and the creator of the full-length Makers and Shakers workshop, which we developed at CET this past fall. Makers and Shakers Making Things for Deeper Learning is available in different formats. We have a 3-hour face-to-face version of this workshop you can subscribe to, as well as a 5-hour fully online version. We also have blended versions of the workshop. If you're interested in taking the full workshop, you can register at workshops.cetconnect.org, and I'll put that up on the screen at the end of this presentation. I'm just going to say a little bit about why we created the workshop and some things to look for during this presentation. Using hands-on learning in schools is a pretty old idea, but the interest in our communities these days in hands-on learning and do-it-yourself projects, in maker fairs, makerspaces, and in new tools like 3D printing gives hands-on learning a lot of new energy. And of course, it's beginning to creep right into schools. We built Makers and Shakers around 2 new books, and we're going to take a look at an excerpt of one of these in a minute. You don't have to buy them, but they really are terrific if you can get a hold of them. You don't have to buy them to take the full-length class. One is called Invent to Learn. You may just see the cover there, but it's by Gary Steger and Sylvia Martinez of California. Gary Steger is a high school principal and author, and Sylvia Martinez is a computer scientist and author. And Ms. Martinez appears in our videos throughout the workshop as our national expert. You're going to see her in a video in just a minute. The other book we used, and this is one we'll show an excerpt from in a bit, is called The Art of Tinkering by Karen Wilkerson and Mike Petrich of the famous Exploratorium Science Museum in San Francisco. Both are terrific reads. We're going to take a look at a pretty gorgeous excerpt from The Art of Tinkering, which is as much an art book as it is an education book at the end of my presentation. I want to thank the Ohio Department of Education for its support for developing Makers and Shakers and offering it statewide, as well as some support from the Duke Energy Foundation. And now I'm going to switch over to full screen slides, hopefully. Let me push the buttons. And I know we have a few folks on the line. We're excited about that. We'll see what kind of making experiences you've had. So we'll see this hall of mirrors for just a second. And now we should be seeing some slides. To ask questions during the presentation, Amy and Dusty may have covered this, but you go to the conference website, you click on Digital Learning Day tab, you scroll down to the Makers and Shakers session, and then you click on Ask a Question. I think I got that right, Dusty. Let me know if I didn't. Makers and Shakers, making things for deeper learning. This is the agenda and the goals that we use in the full-length workshop. It is kind of a motivational one. We want people to get excited about these new strategies around hands-on learning, especially for their engagement value for students. We do cover the basics of creating a school makerspace. We know librarians are also creating makerspaces. I guess I will ask if there are any librarians out there, and you can write in on the question sheet if you're out there. We certainly want to hear from you. Hope you'll have some questions. We want to talk a little about where the pedagogy of hands-on learning comes from. As I mentioned, it's kind of an old approach that's now being reborn. It never goes away. And in the full-length workshop, participants actually get to design a maker activity to support their teaching. I want to start out with a video. It's about 5 minutes long. It's an overview video. It features Sylvia Martinez's comments about the movement writ large, both making in the classroom and making in society. And it's called Why Making Works in Schools.
Well, I think making things has always worked in schools. In the past few years, we've sort of lost the tradition of integrating that into classrooms. We've split children into kids who make things with their hands who are not going to college, and kids who are going to college are not being allowed to make things with their hands. I think it's a trend that is reversing, and I think the maker movement is part of that.
Hands-on learning for me is the chance for students to have voice and choice in their art making or in anything that they're doing with education. It means it's a chance for them to make sense. It's a practical application. It's, in Bloom's taxonomy, the highest level of creating for higher order thinking skills. And hands-on learning, I think, is a way to kind of express and communicate what it is they're learning and how they're making sense of the world.
And in our maker classes or engineering classes, the students actually get to do their own directing of their education. You know, they sit down and we talk about principles, but then they take those principles and apply them in a unique way. Every student's going to apply the principles differently.
It's bigger than it should be. More. Add it to the pack and see how big it is.
Yeah, actually, add to pack.
Well, I think the revival of the idea of making things in the classroom is kind of being energized by the maker movement. The idea that there's this global revolution that really is about learning new ways to do things, learning how to solve problems, is something that should interest schools. Teachers are looking at the maker movement and seeing something that's this vibrant, exciting learning opportunity and bringing the tools and materials into the classroom.
So anything within kind of a maker environment or an engineering, pre-engineering environment creates an opportunity for those skills to be brought into the classroom. You know, that can be any type of science principle or math principle, but then they use that within the design realm. They're constantly working with density or circuits or other principles that they would find in math and science.
You know, you can go back to Piaget, who said that knowledge is a consequence of experience. So when Piaget wanted to learn more about how children learn mathematics, he hired Seymour Papert, who was a young South African mathematician. And then Seymour Papert added his own version called Constructionism, where he said that to really cement that knowledge in place, making something tangible, making something in the real world that you can share with others, and that's important to you, is the way to really accelerate that knowledge. Seymour Papert now says that John Dewey wasn't wrong. People say sometimes, well, John Dewey, he didn't know what he's talking about. You know, you can't really do the experiential learning. Papert said that Dewey wasn't wrong, he was just ahead of his time. That he didn't have the technology, he didn't have the tools. Those didn't exist at the turn of the century, but they do now.
We like to utilize those concepts in the curriculum that we're already working with, which is a Project Lead the Way curriculum. But we're trying to infuse that curriculum with the maker concept or Fab Lab movement. So we've got a bunch of the equipment from the Fab Lab initiative in our shop: laser cutters, 3D scanners, 3D printers, CNC routers, milling machines. So we look for application in that curriculum for the students to then come over and build their designs in the shop, rather than just leaving the designs in the virtual world.
The next generation science standards are, first of all, written by scientists. When you look at the standards document, it calls for some very top-level things that are extremely relevant to the maker movement and getting making back in the classroom. Authentic tasks, real assessment, giving kids deeper experiences, more meaningful experiences with subjects that go longer, letting kids get good at doing things.
The way they're written now, it's conducive for makerspace movements, for project-based learning. It's conducive for the way kids think today. And I think it's kind of, we ask the kids to take a risk, but we as educators need to equally take a risk and try something new and rethink the way we're providing instruction, rethink our physical environment. The standards and the statements, the way they're written, reflect the change in the students that we're seeing in our classrooms every day.
We have the power now to give children agency over their learning. They can look things up for themselves on the internet. They can now see that learning can happen in different ways. And I think it's up to schools to come up to the way the real world is learning and doing real work. And I think it's a pendulum swinging back away from this over-reliance on testing and test preparation as constituting the whole of learning.
So one thing Sylvia Martinez says in there that I think is thematic for the whole workshop and this movement is, she says, making something in the world that you can share with others. The engineering teachers we've talked to, like Tony Rainsberger, have said it's not enough anymore, they find, to just make something in the virtual world, like a model or a project, and leave it there virtually. Sometimes you just have to give it three-dimensional shape and form. So what problem is this approach to learning trying to solve? Well, this is one clue. There's a test of creativity that's been given for a lot of years called the Torrance Test of Creative Thinking. It's been going down since 1990. We don't quite know why. This researcher speculates that it might have something to do with the way we've begun to emphasize testing, perhaps at the expense of some of the other things we do in school. But nobody knows for sure. But this is certainly a problem that making is poised to tackle. One of the reasons it's a big problem is that when you talk to employers, high-tech employers especially, like the Googles and the Yahoos of the world, they will tell you that creativity is what they value most in their employees. Not a little bit, not almost as much, but most of anything that they're looking at when they're looking to hire folks. And so that's a big societal change that we have to pay attention to. Making and hands-on learning is a response to this, and as Sylvia Martinez says, she calls it a stance. She says making is a stance that puts learners at the center of the educational process and creates opportunities that students may never have encountered themselves. We heard a little bit of that in the video from Tony Rainsberger, the engineering design teacher, saying that it helps students take control of their learning. And that's a feeling students like. We heard that again and again in the interviews that we did for the show. A couple of definitions, because a lot of these terms get thrown around. What is making in the first place? Here's the way that Sylvia Martinez and her colleague Gary Steger describe it. They say making is about the active role of construction plays in learning. The maker has a product in mind when working with tools and materials. And we certainly saw plenty of tools and plenty of materials in some of those classrooms that we were looking at there. Another term that came up was a theory of learning called Constructionism, developed by Seymour Papert out at MIT in, I believe it was as far back as the 70s, late 80s, or early 80s. Constructionism, the simplest definition of constructionism, evokes the idea of learning by making, or learning by doing. And that theory goes back a long ways. It goes back to Piaget, as the video pointed out. Seymour Papert, who started out thinking about how to teach students to learn to program computers with a language called BASIC, and then another language called Logo that he developed. He was a student of Jean Piaget's. And other carriers of the torch for constructionism include a group at the MIT organization, or the university, called the Lifelong Kindergarten Group. You may have heard Mitchell Resnick, who leads that group, talk at some of your conferences. And now Sylvia Martinez and her colleagues and their organization, which is called Invent to Learn, are carrying the torch for this. Tinkering is another term that comes up. I mentioned this book, The Art of Tinkering. A simple definition they use out at the Exploratorium in San Francisco, where they have a lab built around tinkering that they open to the general public, is they define as working with materials and phenomena. Working with materials and phenomena. When you talk to engineering educators about tinkering, they don't see it as a nice to have or something that you do when you have spare time or you're bored. They see it as an integral part of the design build process in engineering. And they often talk about tinkering as a way of getting unstuck when you're solving a problem and you're stuck. The pedagogy of making, as I mentioned, it goes back a long ways, and it has to do with making something and sharing it. That seems to be very basic to it all. Teachers should be concerned with making things visible, or making private thinking public. All the people who have studied constructivist learning in this audience know that making private thinking public is a big deal in constructivism. Making is a way of documenting the thinking of the learner as a shareable artifact. One of the things about teaching programming, for example, or doing any kind of digital design work, is a lot of the work tends to be kind of invisible. It's in there in the computer. Bring it out so you can share it with other people, and so that other people, maybe non-technical people, can have some reaction to it, can experience it. And making an object, printing it out, building it is one way of doing that. When we do the workshop, we like to look at lots of examples of making-oriented projects in schools and communities. Some of the best ones I had were from what's called the Bay Area Maker Fair. This is another site that has quite a few examples of projects, called the Maker Ed organization. And when you go to that site in the slides, you get a number of different flavors of hands-on oriented teaching and learning. There's one here that Steger and Martinez wrote called 8 Elements of a Good Maker Project. What makes a good maker project? You might ask yourself. What makes a good project like this? Well, they have 8 elements. This is out of their book. Purpose and relevance, time, complexity, controlling complexity, intensity, connection, connecting the learners to each other, to other subject areas, access to digital material, shareability, that's what Martinez was talking about, you got to be able to share it with others, and novelty. So those are their big 8 for a good maker-based project. One source of interesting materials for projects and interesting ideas for projects is in something called the High-Low Tech project. And that's on the third row here, if I can find it, High-Low Tech. Well, it's a little like concentration here. We'll have to see where that is. It's there someplace. Informal science projects. I know we have some science teachers out there, and there are examples. Oh, here's High-Low Tech. This is founded by a professor at MIT. She's come up with some kits and kit-oriented projects that use things like wearable circuits, conductive thread. Lots of these projects use LEDs and associated electronics to do interesting things. And there's a whole area called wearable computing that she supplies some kits for. There's a lot of interest in wearable computing. Of course, we have a wearable device coming out in April called the Apple Watch. Informal science projects are there. There's information for making things at the library. Librarians have been a vanguard of the maker movement, and this is a good site here for some of the projects that they do in libraries. Recycled wreaths, lots of things with Legos, a stop-motion puppet, needle projects, pop art projects, making stamps with Sugru, which must be a kind of a Play-Doh, a cola can battery, and this is just one page of 19 projects, so you can see there's plenty of grist for the mill here. There's also something here called the Maker Movement. Let them build and learn, and this is a good English language arts example. Often English language arts teachers will say, well, what's in this movement for me? And here's a good example of something you can do, hands-on learning in the classroom. Here's somebody who's building a replica of the Globe Theater, where Shakespeare did all his work. And they're making it out of real materials. They're not just using pixels, they're building a full-scale model there. I don't know if there are any more pictures. I guess there aren't. So there's really something in every content area in this arena of making in the classroom. These are some of the references. I've run references a couple of times in your slides, and this is the Art of Tinkering book. This is Martinez and Steger, Invent to Learn. Oops, I don't want to do this, sorry. Creating an intellectual design space. We talk about making a makerspace, and we have resources in here that will point you to ideas for design. The physical space itself is pretty important. The folks at the Exploratorium, for example, where they've created a maker lab for the public, have said that the shape of the table is hugely important to making in the classroom. What they're really interested in is people who participate in this being able to see each other's hands, to see how they're building things. We don't always think of that when we think of learning something in school, but in this case, seeing how somebody uses their hands is really important to how they're putting something together. Makerspace is a term that gets thrown around a lot. Here's a definition of it: a publicly accessible place to design and create. Our classrooms can be makerspaces. They are maybe semi-public, quasi-public spaces. You may have heard of Fab Labs, and that's something that comes out of MIT. They basically have a project that helps STEM-oriented schools buy the tools and equipment they need to teach about fabricating. So we're talking about laser cutters, and we're talking about milling machines. We're talking about perhaps 3D printers. They define them as low-cost digital spaces where you can make almost anything, aimed at supporting project-based student-centered learning. And maybe you have one of these in your neighborhood. I know we do in Dayton and we do in Cincinnati. And you have a very large one in Columbus. If you're looking to actually build a space, this is a good guide. This Digital Harbor Foundation, which is a public makerspace, has some good resources here at this site. I'll see if it comes up, and it looks like maybe it's coming up a little slowly. So I'm going to go back to slides. There's also a resource here just for librarians, a librarian's guide to makerspaces, 16 resources. And this is very detailed about creativity in the library, how you make that transition to a makerspace in your library. I've talked to librarians who say you can start with a table. It does not have to be a whole room. Creating and nurturing communities of teen writers, making things in academic libraries, manufacturing makerspaces. How do you handle some of these tools in a library environment? So that's covered there. Oops. The Exploratorium in San Francisco has been a leader in the maker movement, and they sell kits. So in our online version of this workshop, we take people to their store where you can buy kits like this. These are some soft circuits kits. So there's somebody using what's called conductive thread to light up an LED, create an LED circuit. There's the battery up there on the right. They sell a kit that'll get you started with soft circuits. They have a kit called Tinkering Fundamentals. We use that in the workshop at a distance. It includes LEDs, the button or coin batteries, wires to connect things, a motor if you want to make something with a motor, copper tape, which is conductive tape, and I believe this is conductive thread, so you can start sewing or sticking your circuits, and in fact there's a kind of ink now that will let you even draw a circuit, which is a pretty interesting concept. I want to try that out. So one of the activities, one of the kits that we give people, I guess I'd ask if there are any questions coming in, Dusty, at this point that I need to handle. Otherwise, I'll keep going.
None so far, Gary. I think everybody's just listening.
They're absorbing. Make some questions out there. So one of the things we do is called a digital card project, which uses LEDs and batteries. So you saw some of that in that Exploratorium kit. We have them buy the kit if they're online, or we provide the kit ourselves. And then we have them follow some directions. Whoops. Okay, that one's not going to come up. The directions are suddenly missing, but basically it takes you through the whole process of making one of these cards. And as you can see, this is from some of our times we've delivered the workshop. Here's somebody who's made one of these cards out of what's called foam construction paper. It's sticky-backed construction paper. You can also use regular construction paper. You have to use a lot more glue in that case, or a lot more copper tape. One of the advantages of the sticky back is that you can make a little sandwich with it and actually take one of these coin batteries and the LED and sort of smush them together and have it light up. So that's kind of handy that you can do that smushing and not have to do quite so much gluing. That makes a big difference. And where do you get this stuff? You can get this foam construction paper, the sticky back stuff, at Michael's. And as I say, kits are available from us and also from places like the Exploratorium. One of the questions that comes up a lot is, how does making connect to new learning standards? And the connection is more straightforward than a lot of people think. But let me go to another little video clip from Sylvia Martinez, computer scientist by trade, who talks a little bit about the connection to new standards.
The next generation science standards are, first of all, written by scientists. I think that's immensely positive, just in and of itself. You know, and when you look at the standards document, it calls for some very top-level things that are extremely relevant to the maker movement and getting making back in the classroom. Authentic tasks, real assessment, moving away from multiple choice testing, giving kids deeper experiences, more meaningful experiences with subjects that go longer, letting kids get good at doing things. And I think all of these things ask us to question what we're doing in our science and mathematics classrooms today. I think all teachers should constantly be thinking about new research, new methods, new tools, new technology, and find ways to bring these into their classroom to refresh their curriculum. Science has changed. The work of a scientist has changed. The computers has changed a lot, and that's happened in the last few years. And yet, much of our science curriculum, we're using the same materials, we're using the same textbooks with small modifications that we used, 50 or 100 years ago. I think there's so much more out there, and I think these new standards really ask us to be reflective about our classroom practices. So people often ask me, so I'm an English teacher, what does the maker movement do for me? I think that the maker movement is more than the stuff. It's a stance towards learning. It's a way that you're helping children see themselves as problem solvers. And those problems can be problems in history, because you want kids to be doing the work of a historian, not learning about history. If they're doing the work of a historian, they need tools. And historians use computers nowadays. You want them to be thinking about the world and asking their own questions about the world. Programming a computer for language arts projects, I think, is a really interesting way to go. I mean, I get this question more than you would think. I teach Latin. What can the maker movement do for me? And it's like, oh, really? Well, how about like doing random word poetry generation in Latin? You want kids to understand parts of language? Let's have them program a computer. I think it's a fantastic integration. I think that you can tell a story with materials. I find a lot of times when I'm working with materials, I'm thinking in my head about how I'm going to write it down, how am I going to explain it to other people. That's technical writing that the Common Core English standards are calling for. I think being able to explain your world is both math and science and English language arts and history, because you're explaining your world or explaining your past or predicting the future.
So that clarifies the issue of standards a little bit, and I'm going to show you something about how design is actually baked into the new standards. Ohio's Next Generation Science Standards, here's a quote right out of them. Undertake a design project engaging in the design cycle to construct and implement a solution that meets specific design criteria and constraints. That's the grade 6 to 8 condensed practices from the Next Gen Science Standards. So design is right in there, and the maker process in the classroom is all about design thinking. This is a quote from Ohio Department of Education. Engineering is design under constraint that develops and applies technology to satisfy human needs and wants. Technology and engineering, coupled with the knowledge and methods derived from science and mathematics, profoundly influence the quality of life. So again, we see it's baked into these new standards. Of course, we have to know something about assessment for these projects, and there are rubrics out there. Many of them are similar to the project-based and problem-based learning rubrics that are in use now. They are more detailed in a way, assessments, so we have to learn a little bit more about how to do them, but they can be done. Portfolio-style assessment is one of the tools that's used in assessing these kinds of projects, but it all can be done. One of the things we do in our workshop is we have our workshoppers download a template and actually develop an activity plan for a maker-oriented project in the classroom. Not a whole lesson plan, but an activity plan that could support a lesson or part of a lesson. That we give them a little feedback on that template when we've seen the ideas that they're talking about. It makes it kind of project-based, which is fun in the workshop. I wanted to sort of wind up with a little view of a couple of things. One is a group of makers in action at Springboro Schools just outside of Dayton. This is the 5 Points Elementary School. Some of these folks were in our very first workshop on making down in Cincinnati, and they started learning to build kits. I showed them how to build a pop-up card kit on a Tuesday. They turned around and taught it to 50 kids in their after-school program on Thursday. You can follow them if you have Twitter at MakerFP, and I'll give you a little look at what they're up to here. I'm just going to have to find them. They're called 5 Points Makerspace. 5 Points Makerspace. So here they are, and they take lots of pictures. They shoot lots of videos. You'll get a lot of ideas from looking at what they're doing. And I'm going to just show you a few of them here. If we go down to January 13th, these are all by month. So they just started this year. January 13th, it's just about the time they took our workshop. And I'm kind of proud of that because we helped them. Come on, January 13th. Here we go. So this is some of the folks from 5 Points Elementary learning to make the pop-up digital cards in our lab in Cincinnati. And then shortly after that, on the 29th of January, they started putting that into action. And it looked something like this. Let's see here. What can you create with an LED light and a button battery? And it looks something like that. Or that. Or that. Or that. So they're having some fun. Another kit we showed them how to work on is called a Scribblebot. And I don't know if you've heard of Scribblebots. It's an interesting kind of kit-based project, design project that you do. And I will look for a couple of Scribblebot photos here. Come on, Scribblebots. 29th. Come on, Scribblebots. You're in here, I know you are. Scribble machines at work. So here's somebody making a Scribblebot. They're using a berry basket, some markers. That's the kit we provide. There's some LEDs in there. There's a coin battery. They put a motor on top. They fire it up, and it starts to make interesting artwork. And we can actually look at one of these in action called Scribblebot Video. Let's see if we can find that. They have posted a heck of a lot of stuff. Wow. It's amazing. Any questions while I'm queuing up the Scribblebot video? You'll want to see Scribblebot video.
Not so far, Gary.
Okay, well, they'll have one about the Scribblebot video because
Okay.
Scribblebots are pretty awesome. Let me, these are balloons. We're going back to Scribblebots, folks. The thing with 5 Points is they're doing so many darn things. Scribble machines at work. Where's a video? Scribble machine, makerspace. Okay, let's take a look at this one. Okay, well, yeah, we'll look at this one. That's a scribble machine at work. And you can design them different ways. Some folks like to make them out of berry boxes. This is one that, well, let's see this design. And of course, you can do endless tinkering with these to improve their performance, which is design thinking. This makes some very nice ones. Isn't that something? So I just want to close with a few pages from The Art of Tinkering, because the aesthetics of some of this stuff is something else, and that's a lot of the appeal of some of these making projects, are the aesthetic beauty of these creations. Of course, the Tinkering Lab here operates in San Francisco. Many artists, as well as regular old folks, walk in and do projects all the time. They have some pretty high-end equipment, including welding. But they also use kits. These kind of tools that we've been seeing. There are tools for Scribblebots. Some of those DC motors that we're talking about. There is, you see how much time they spend thinking about tables. They try and make them sort of curvy shapes so that people can see each other across the corners and see what they're doing with their hands. This is a activity they do around aerial photography. They connect little cameras to balloons, to helium balloons, and send them up. So these are actually pictures of California, shot by tinkered kits. And they show you some ways of putting them together using pop bottles, cameras. There goes one. These are legal, as it turns out. They are not drones because they're balloons. They also do stuff with rockets, and many of you have probably done rocket projects. They do a lot of things with LEDs, and the quality of some of the LED work at the Exploratorium is phenomenal, just phenomenal. So I think these are LEDs and maybe light tubes of some sort. They're doing some photography here, some underwater photography with some of this stuff. Here's something else made out of LEDs, an LED sculpture. Look at that. Isn't that wonderful? And of course, you need a lot of tools to do this kind of work. And they have a lot of tools. And many libraries are making this kind of tooling investment as well. So it's a pretty darned exciting area. Many of you would like a certificate for today's presentation. If you want that, you need to use this code, all caps, letter M, letter T, and you go to howedtext.org, you click on Digital Learning Day, and you put in that code, follow the directions. If you want to register for the full-length Makers and Shakers, Making Things for Deeper Learning professional development, you can go to this website and register. That's my contact info. And I think we've got a minute or two left if there are any questions out there. I'll come off of and back to video here in a second. If I can make it come back to video, I think I can. Any questions?
Well, Gary, you don't really have a question, but Debbie, who's been on the dock and has been with us all day today, she's saying that at her school they work with Raspberry Pis.
Oh, yeah, Raspberry Pis.
And they're really enjoying, and the kids really enjoy it. And the only thing that the hurdle that they seem to run into is the cost of the other materials for the things they'd like to do.
Yeah, the cost of other materials. And I suppose it depends on what kind of things they want to do. I'd need to know a little more about what they hope to do. But some materials are expensive. Some materials are surprisingly cheap. I had trouble originally getting LEDs, and now I've brought the cost way down. So if you'll send me a note about what you're getting into, we can tell you how we source some of this stuff. Glad to help on that one.
Yeah, I think that I will make sure that your information is on the bottom of this. We don't have too many questions, and well, since we are out of time anyhow, I think most of us, like myself, I sat here and with my mouth hanging open, listening to every word you said and looking at the potential of all of these really interesting things that you're talking about. that a lot of us don't
something.
don't see. And then someone was asking for us to restate the code. It is MMT. Yeah, that is correct. The code for today is MMT. I am going to delete that off of the document, though, because we're not putting the code on there. But yes, for those who are asking, the code is MMT. And I think that can conclude today's session. Thank you so much, Gary.
My pleasure.
All right.
Thank you all. Thank you, Dusty.
And other people are saying thank you, Gary.
I hope we see you all on the
right.
last
Happy digital
session that's coming up. Talk to you soon.